All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Big Ben Show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and it's been great to get your responses to our opening of this new era for this podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about gaslighting America, the process that played out under the Biden administration that only continued to the very point of this week learning that Joe Biden, the former president, has advanced stage prostate cancer, something that the American people deserved to know about while he was president, but they never got the truth about. But of course, the conversation began not with that cancer diagnosis, which of course is something that we can have sympathy for him and his family. Another thing that's happened that, you know, if it happens to anybody in your life, and for those of us who've had the challenge of having a loved one die of cancer, it's a terrible thing. But the conversation began, of course, with the decline mentally of Joe Biden that was hidden from the American people as he emerged less and less from the White House to be in the public eye. And as the process played out through the last election, that made clear that he was not up to snuff to serve another 4 years. A critical moment in this, of course, was the Robert Hur report, one that came out via text to the American people, but had the audio released just this past week in a way that made clear that he was not able to operate at a functional level, remembering dates, keeping track of things that were happening politically or within his administration, raising all sorts of questions about how present the president really was. Cut to.
What's happened in the meantime is that Trump gets elected in November of 2017? 2016. All right. So, why do I have 2017 here?
That's when you left office, in January of 2017.
Yeah, okay. But that's when Trump gets sworn in.
Right.
January.
Right. Correct.
Okay, yeah.
It's one thing to read that transcript. It's another to listen to the halting audio to an old man who was struggling to remember things, which is essentially what Robert Hur told us in his report when he made the decision that Biden had indeed taken things that he shouldn't have out of the White House, but that it was not in the interest of the country to pursue a conviction or a trial along these lines because he would come across as an elderly man incapable of remembering things. For that, he was lambasted, and Republicans who brought it up were lambasted as well by a crew of Democrats. Cut 3.
The comments that were made by that prosecutor, gratuitous, inaccurate, and inappropriate. The way that the president's demeanor in that report was characterized could not be more wrong on the facts.
Special Counsel Hur is as far as I remember, is obviously a Republican, a prosecutor. He's not a medical doctor. He's just not. It's not for him to speak to. It's flatly wrong. It is inappropriate. It is gratuitous.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Alejandro Mayorkas just great at his job at everything that he does. And of course, this conversation actually continued even beyond the point of this report, even all the way up until that notorious debate. Cut 4.
I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were
stuttering,
mocking his stutter.
Trump there mocking Joe Biden's stutter.
President Biden obviously suffers from a stutter. It seems to be from him and his campaign something along the lines of, we should make fun of people who have stutters, we should slime Democrats with unfounded allegations.
Biden was pretty gaffe-prone before.
Yes, exactly.
And I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline.
President Biden embraces his stutter, talking about it, while Trump mocks it, exaggerates it, belittles it.
You know, when I hear all that from Jake Tapper, it just reminds me the next time that I misspeak or run or make some kind of gaffe, I'm just going to bring up the fact that I had a significant speech defect as a child for many, many years. And that's just always a good fallback excuse. Of course, it wasn't about a stutter. They were gaslighting us. They were not telling us the truth. And yet they were prefacing it by saying that they were being more honest than ever about how well Joe Biden was doing his job. Cuts 5 and 6.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
But looking back at that, do you say, well, it was misleading to say best Biden ever without caveating it and say, except on the days when he's not the best Biden ever?
Well, but I never saw those days personally.
Well, you did, because you saw him address a dead congresswoman, and you saw him in South Carolina.
A dead congresswoman, yeah.
Yeah, well, more than that. I mean, I can show you the RNC clip reels. There were plenty of days in public when he was not the best Biden ever, and of course, shortly after,
he stumbled and bumbled around. Mark, I mean, yeah, he certainly did. Donald Trump did. Other politicians did. It's actually the same case as a lot of times when I've gone in and talked to Donald Trump.
Joe Scarborough, F you if you can't handle the truth, to, oh, well, this, lots of politicians stumble and bumble around. Look, this whole thing is a ridiculously obvious gaslighting of the American public. They were telling us you're not seeing what is in front of your eyes all the time, especially if you're watching Fox News. The thing that they were counting on was for Americans to not be paying attention, for them to be naive, for them to have the wool pulled over their eyes long enough for them to win again. That's how much they cared about holding on to power. And that's going to be the thing that bites them for this moment, which I think is going to create a level of distrust that we have never seen before in politics for the entire leadership class and everyone associated with the Biden agenda and the Biden cabinet. Cut 7.
I was shocked to see his condition when he came out, and so was the world. And that wasn't the first time he was in that condition. The book makes it very, very clear. There are people who knew and said nothing. And that is a crime against this republic. And I think the Democrats are going to pay for a long time for being a part of what is now being revealed to be a massive cover-up.
This cover-up was one that was obvious to those of us who were paying attention. But there were Americans, I think all across the country, who were unsure about this all the way up until that debate happened. And even after that debate happened, people around Biden still maintained that he was just having a bad night, that he was someone who deserved to have that nomination, who deserved to run again. And because he had been nominated by the democratic process that completely excluded any kind of competition in any kind of form, that was completely decided from on top, that type of situation has never befallen a party before. And their response to it was still to try to gaslight us, was still to try to insist that we were the ones with the problem, that we were just going after an old man who had given so much for his country and deserved the right to run again. Of course, they held that position just until they could get the polls back that showed Joe Biden was absolutely destined to lose. Polls which we now learn, especially from this book, were never even being shown to him by his closest advisors, who were keeping him in a bubble to hide his decline from all of us in the bizarre hope that they could get back into the White House again for another 4 years. This is an approach that time and again we see the left use. They act as if it's weird for us to be obsessed about things. They act as if it's weird for us to focus in on questions that are obvious. They act as if it's weird for us to point out that the emperor has no clothes. That's what Peter Doocy and people like him have experienced at the White House over the past 4 years, dealing with Karine Jean-Pierre and with Jen Psaki and all the rest, who basically said to them over and over again, there's no there. You just have a narrative you're trying to advance. That's something that, frankly, is still being a tool used by them today. Cut 15.
The Trump era, I've been investigated a lot, audited a lot, and so it's not my first rodeo. I'm in some strange way the relationship he can't get over, maybe because I've lived a happy, productive life since.
James Comey still acts as if the obsession isn't on his part, isn't on the weirdness of him posting a message like that, 8647, which he absolutely knows what it is. He acts as if the obsession is on the other side, as if it's Donald Trump who gets up every day thinking about him. You know who that reminds me of? Cut 14.
Janice was like weirdly jealous of him. Like if I would blow her off to hang out with Kyle, she'd be like, why didn't you call me back? And I'd be like, why are you so obsessed with me?
This is the situation that we are in right now as a country. Democrats, their allies on the left, their allies in the media, have been playing these games with us time and again, where they try to hide the ball and they try to pretend like something that we care about, that we think is important, and that we want to know the answers about is something that's very weird on our part, that we're weirdly obsessed with these things. As it turned out, we were right to ask these questions about Joe Biden. We were right to ask whether he would actually be able to function in another 4 years in the White House. We were right to be saying, we feel like you're not telling us the whole truth. And actually, now we've learned it went even deeper than just the mental decline. It went to his health as well. Don't be gaslit. Ask these questions. That's the lesson of the past week. Thanks for listening to The Big Ben Show. You can email us at bigben@fox.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter, The Transom, at thetransom.com. Subscribe to The Spectator, where I'm editor at large at thespectator.com. And of course, I hope that you'll follow us, that you'll like, recommend, and subscribe to us, sharing us with your friends if you like the show. I'd like to welcome Senator Jon Cornyn of Texas to The Big Ben Show. Senator, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
You bet, Ben. Good to be with you.
So I have to say, obviously, and I've said it on the show before as a caveat, that I got my career started in politics, working for a couple of different people and then working for you. And I still consider it one of the things that was one of the more rewarding experiences of my life. And it's funny to me how many of the people who I met while working for you are still around and still doing big things. Who knew that Chip Roy and Judge Jim Ho would still be making the kind of impact that they have? Does it surprise you that so many people who were on your staff there at the beginning have gone on to do these significant things in politics and law and the like?
Well, I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, Ben. I followed your career very closely, and it's a source of great satisfaction, gratification for me. And I've always tried hard to pick people who I thought would make me look good. And people, smart people who, and as you point out, some of them have gone on to, in addition to you, do amazing things. And I'm still working with Chip Roy as he's busy on the Rules Committee trying to get this big, beautiful bill done. And and then watching people like Jim Ho on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and among others. There's a number of others, but yeah, it's really it's a source of great satisfaction.
Well, I want to ask you about this Rules Committee situation. Obviously, Chip has been a very vocal, opponent of the kind of irresponsible, in his view, fiscal situation here in America, and they have had this negotiation going on, especially over these SALT issues on the House side that, really, fall into that category when it comes into the idea of red states essentially being taxed to pay for the policies of blue states.
Right.
What's your take on that situation? Do you think that's going to be an issue that holds things up on the Senate side once this bill probably inevitably gets passed?
Well, it's unfortunate that some of these blue state members are basically holding the rest of the bill ransom for this SALT deduction, which, just to reiterate your point, subsidizes blue states with high tax rates because it allows them to deduct their state and local taxes from their federal income tax, which means my constituents in Texas, 31 million of them, are paying for the state and local taxes in essence, that New York and California and other blue states and urban cities are imposing on their citizens. So it's very uncomfortable, to say the least. I do understand the speaker's dilemma, because he's got to get to the magic number to pass this bill. And this is one of those compromises that he's having to make. But I share Chip's consternation and at having to even talk about subsidizing these blue states.
Mm-hmm. You know, you obviously have been someone who has been very, supportive of President Trump's policies, and voted with him so closely over your tenure. But right now, you face a situation in Texas where you are expected to have one of the most difficult primaries of any of the Republicans who are running in this coming cycle, just given the fact that such a prominent politician in Ken Paxton has taken you on. When it comes to explaining to the Texas voters why you are the person who actually makes sense in terms of representing the state, in Washington, what are the questions that you get from them, and how do you respond to either their concerns or to the kind of criticism that some folks have given you for the not being conservative enough, or what they wish that you had done differently?
Yeah, I'd be happy to just rely on the facts instead of some of the propaganda and disinformation. I'm proud of the endorsement I've received from the Border Patrol Union, and which I think is kind of the gold standard in Texas for border security, support for securing the border. And of course, worked very hard during President Biden's term to reverse his open border policies. And as you point out, my voting record with President Trump, we've gone back and calculate the 4 years he was president, and then now in his new term, and I have a 99.2% pro-Trump voting record, which may surprise some people, but it's no surprise to me, because typically when you're in the majority and you have a president of the same party, you're doing everything you can to help that president's agenda succeed. And that's what I did in his first term when we passed the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. And then, of course, both Senator Cruz and I have been instrumental on the Judiciary Committee in getting the President Trump's judges confirmed, which is obviously having a dramatic impact and will for the foreseeable future, particularly on the Supreme Court. And so I think part of what I need to do is just get the facts in front of the voters, and then I'm confident that they will understand that I've been effective. I have supported President Trump and his policies, which I think Texas primary voters want me to do.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's no secret to anybody who pays attention to Texas politics that you and Ken Paxton don't particularly like each other. I'm not going to ask you to get into too deep into personal conflict, but I mean, we're familiar with the accusations against him. We're familiar, about, corruption issues that have come up around him. Why do you think that despite those types of questions, he's inspired the kind of loyalty that he has among some Texans who see him as, basically being some more diehard or hardcore guy when it comes to these things? Do you think that he's basically been able to play the victim?
Yeah, I do. And, Ben, I've represented the state of Texas a long time. I know Texans, and I know Texans believe that character still matters. And the Attorney General is betting it doesn't. And that is essentially, I think, what's at stake here in this campaign. I, of course, was Attorney General for 4 years, and Mr. Paxton's been Attorney General now for 8 years. I applaud some of the work he's done fighting the Biden administration. I would have done the same thing if I was still there. But I just think that character matters, effectiveness matters too. And I've been routinely rated as the most effective Republican senator in recent years. Plus, I think we also need to look at what could happen if, for some unforeseeable reason, he was successful in winning the nomination. public polls that have been released show him losing to a Democrat. So if you want to lose Texas, and that would have dramatic negative impact on conservative policy for years to come, not just in the Senate, but also in the presidency, then nominate somebody who is going to be vulnerable in the general election. So this is much bigger than just about me, but I'm determined to make sure that we win, and because I do believe character still matters.
Let's talk about those midterms for a minute. The situation, obviously, for this White House is they understand fully that if these upcoming midterms go badly for them, that it would essentially dramatically shorten the effectiveness of this second Trump presidency.
That's right.
And they're aware of that, obviously, on the House, but there's also going to be, competition on the Senate side, even with a decent map for Republicans. What are the things that you think need to happen over the next year to effectively allow Republicans to go into the midterms with some real strength, given that a lot of the prognosticators are already saying, the House is probably lost, et cetera? And how does the GOP basically turn that narrative around, both in Texas and across the country?
Well, I think we need to deliver. We need to deliver on President Trump's policies, his campaign promises that he made during the recent campaign. And we need to deliver, for example, this big, beautiful bill, which will avoid a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase on the American people. And one of the things that I've been working with Chip Roy and our House counterparts and some here in the Senate is trying to make sure we begin to rein in some of the mandatory spending programs, because we're at $37 trillion in national debt. We're paying more money on interest on the national debt than we are on defense in a very dangerous world. It's not getting any safer. It's getting more dangerous. So I think, good politics really starts with good policy and actually doing what people elected you to do and what you campaigned on, keeping your word.
One of the things that concerns a lot of Republican voters and supporters of the president, even if they aren't Republicans across the country, is that they've seen blockades put up, not by legislators, but by the judiciary. And I know that you're someone who cares about the importance of the judiciary. You care about it being a branch of government that's truly respected and honored. But at the same time, these frustrations have emerged about all these district judges who basically seem to be able to, put the skids out there and stop so many of these different policies from going forward. What do you think can be done responsibly and constitutionally to deal with this situation in a way that, acknowledges the importance of the judiciary, but also allows the president, especially in areas where he has clear authority, to pursue the policies that he wants to and that the American people voted for?
Well, I understand President Trump's frustration when he wins the election decisively and then he tries to follow through on his campaign promises. And he's moved very quickly, as you know, particularly through executive orders, to be thwarted by a single federal district judge sitting in some place where the plaintiffs who bring the suit know that judge is probably favorably disposed to that lawsuit and the claims made there. And I think this needs to be addressed, particularly when it comes to the national injunctions. The idea that a single federal judge can thwart the entire executive branch by ruling on a case brought by individuals and then make that apply to the entire country strikes me as very odd and really an abuse of that judicial power. So I'd like to see the Supreme Court, and as you know, they just recently heard oral arguments in a case involving birthright citizenship, where I think we expect to see some paring back of that proposed or that claimed authority to issue nationwide injunctions. But I would also point out, Ben, that the president's been pretty successful in appealing those, which is, of course, the first recourse, both to the circuit courts and to the Supreme Court. So you can't win them all, but I think he's got a pretty good batting average so far.
Let me ask you about some of the conservative perspective on the Supreme Court. there's been some frustrations expressed in several corners about Amy Coney Barrett and some of her rulings recently. I'm sure you've heard this kind of muttering. What is your own perspective on that situation? Do you think that there's any validity to this concern that she's basically moved since she got on the court in a direction that some of these conservatives don't like?
Well, look, as you point out, I've been a lawyer. I've been a judge for 13 years before I was attorney general. So I've worked in and around courtrooms most of my professional life, and you don't win them all. And so I don't think anybody should expect to bat 1,000%. But I think that in the main, the judges that President Trump himself nominated have been outstanding. They have made, I think, decisions that I would like to see them make. But the truth is, we have an independent judiciary, as Justice Scalia liked to point out. That's really the crown jewels of our form of government, is our independent judiciary. Many countries have parchment constitutions, but judges that are not really independent. And so I hate to lose. I hate to see decisions made by the court that I simply disagree with, but that really is part of our system. And so I think we ought to look at the bigger picture rather than individual cases. And in some cases, we can come back as the legislative branch and address it. As you know, constitutional questions are going to be decided by the court, but many times they're interpreting statutes that are the purview of Congress. So we can come back and essentially reverse the decision of the Supreme Court by simply changing the law.
On that birthright citizenship case that you mentioned, do you think that we're actually going to get a ruling on the birthright citizenship question, or is it going to be more about the judicial authority within that case, just given some of the questioning that we heard from the justices?
Yeah, I think it's primarily going to be on the nationwide injunction component of the case. And I wouldn't be surprised if they remand the rest of it, including the birthright citizenship case, back to the circuit court or the district court.
Do you think that, given that we don't, this is one of those kind of issues where, I have my own opinions about birthright citizenship, but I do think that it would be good to have the Supreme Court rule on that issue. Do you hope that they do?
Yeah, I think, as you know, there's been a decision made years ago on the 14th Amendment regarding birthright citizenship. But of course, there are some very strange exceptions to that. That make the rules seem odd to me. Things like if you're a tourist visiting the United States and you happen to have a child, that child isn't entitled to birthright citizenship. But now we know of that generosity on the part of the United States is being abused routinely by people who either come to the United States knowing that if they are fortunate enough to be here when they have a child, that child will be an American citizen. There seems like there needs to be some reforms of that rule at minimum. And I would hope that we could see that from the Supreme Court eventually when they get the case.
You came into politics in a different time and era. Obviously, we were there together. And while I do think that people have kind of blocked out how much people hated George W. Bush at the time, the language around politics, and certainly the constant invocations from the media of creeping fascism was not something that we heard at the time. Do you think, as someone who kind of resembles, this prior brand of politics, I would say, in many respects, in good respects, do you think that there's any going back to that? Or are we in a new era now that we're just going to keep living in, where this is just the way people talk about the other side?
Yeah, Ben, I think, I've been in politics long enough where I've seen a lot of different trends and things that we thought were going to last forever that didn't, and things always change because it's always dependent on public opinion. And so, I take my advice or my counsel and guidance from the people I represent. They're the ones I'm accountable to, and I'm fine with that. And I've run in a number of elections and been, to the best of my ability, responsive to what my constituents are looking for. But right now, there's no question that Texas and the rest of the country, particularly, of course, in Republican primaries, it's Trump country. Mm-hmm. And the question is, I saw it this morning. There was a little piece on Fox and Friends which said, okay, is Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance going to be the nominee in 2028? So we're never satisfied with actually having an election and then having a period of peace. We want to talk about, okay, who's the next person? Mm-hmm. And of course, I think the next person who will be president, and certainly the Republican nominee, will likely be somebody shaped a lot by the America First agenda, and that's certainly what I expect.
When it comes to, I have to ask about it, the situation with former President Biden, and obviously, our prayers are with that family, and this is a horrible thing to go through. There are legitimate questions being raised by a lot of people. J.D. Vance made acknowledgement of this just the other day, that we need to have some clarity on what was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I think particularly about this in the context of how can Americans trust what they're hearing about the health of a president after this circumstance? Is there something that Congress needs to do in its oversight power or anything along those lines to make sure that there's more clarity about this? Because certainly American citizens deserve to know.
I think the initial responsibility lies in the media, because the media's responsibility is to let the public know what's going on. And it's obvious to me that the mainstream media was complicit with the Biden administration in hiding the president's cognitive dysfunction. And, of course, then the question is, well, who's actually in charge when it's clear that Joe Biden was not? And then this issue of his prostate cancer. I mean, the idea that this just popped up recently is ridiculous. Every doctor I've heard talk about it said this could have been the case for basically the last 10 years before it reaches this stage. So I think this is part of why the public distrusts the mainstream media, because frankly, they've just been lied to repeatedly. This was true during President Trump's first term on the so-called Russian hoax and the Steele dossier and Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, most of President Trump's first term was eaten up by special counsel Robert Mueller, appointed based on a phony opposition research from the Hillary Clinton administration, which basically ate up most of his first term of office. So I just think, we need the blowback we're seeing now, and I think we're even seeing this on shows like MSNBC. I happened to be watching this morning when Jake Tapper was talking about his book, Original Sin. And I just think this is a moment of accountability and for the press that has a very important role to play in telling the American people the truth. And they've certainly gotten far afield from that.
Yeah, I think that's not going to get any questioning from our listeners. Just with the time we have left, I wonder what you have learned in the time that you've been in office that has surprised you the most about Washington. Maybe the thought process. Obviously, when you first arrived into Washington, you came not from a legislative background, never having been in that role before, and it always takes some time to adapt to figuring out how to be a legislator, how to lead within the body. What are the things that have surprised you, either positive or negative, about the experience that you've had in the time since, and how things have changed?
Well, I guess what has surprised me is how little things changed between elections, because you have a bureaucracy out there, and this is one of the things President Trump's been trying to address, which essentially undermines, in many instances, the mandate that the president and the elected officials in Congress have received from the voters. And of course, then if you only have 2 years as a House member or 4 years as a president or 6 years as a senator, that's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things to actually turn things around. That's why I am, frankly, so optimistic at President Trump's term of office, second term of office, because he was elected to change things, to change Washington, to change the status quo. And we see how hard that is based on how hard those who would maintain the status quo are fighting against it. And their complaints about everything from Doge and Elon Musk, which has highlighted egregious examples of expenditure of taxpayer dollars, and the things that people like Marco Rubio are trying to do at the State Department. I was in a Foreign Relations Committee hearing yesterday where all the Democrats excoriated Marco for actually trying to reform the State Department, something that's sorely needed. So I think the thing that surprised me is how hard it is to change things, which means that when we have opportunities like this big, beautiful bill, like reconciliation, something we can do with strictly Republican votes, we need to take full advantage of it because these opportunities don't come around very often.
Last question for you, actually, about Elon Musk. He obviously came into Washington, had this huge impact in terms of changing a lot of narratives. Do you think that the cuts that he put into place or the process that he put into place in terms of finding waste, fraud, abuse, et cetera, do you think that those can be solidified in a way that actually endure as opposed to just being, one-off things where the bureaucracy just claws back all that money that they want and the authority that they believe belongs to them?
Well, not to get down in the weeds too much, but there's a process, as you know, called rescission, which requires the White House to send us over a package, and then we can vote to rescind those appropriations in those cases. And we're working with the White House to do that now. And then the appropriations process going forward, that's an area where we can begin to cut those departments, those agencies which are not actually doing the people's work and have some other agenda. So this is going to be a gradual process, but none of this would have happened if it hadn't been for President Trump giving Elon Musk and Doge the opportunity that they've taken to highlight some of the crazy ways that Washington operates and to help root out some of this waste, fraud, and abuse.
Mm-hmm. And a last question, actually. Do you think that the NBA rigged it for the Mavs?
Say that again?
Do you think that the NBA rigged it for the Mavs to get the first pick?
I have no earthly idea.
No comment. Thank you so much, Senator Cornyn. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and good luck in your race.
Thanks, Ben.
Jacqui Heinrich, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. It's a lovely shot there at a very wet day at the White House. I know that it's been a situation full of a lot of questions being raised about the prior White House over the past week. And I wanted to ask you for your own take on that, both informed by your coverage during the Biden years and really the things that you learned by covering the last president. How surprised were you by some of the things that we've learned in the last week or so, or the public has learned, both the different things from the books that have come out, but also the reactions that we've seen from a lot of Democrats and those close to Joe Biden over the past 4 years?
I'm not so surprised at the revelations in the book, only because we have been reporting on this as a network from the beginning. Go back to any of these scenarios that are talked about in the book. Robert Hur, the interview that he gave, whether he was fit to serve another 4 years when he announced his bid for re-election, his faltering voice, his increasingly wobbly gait. We were watching as he aged in front of us. I think that that went unscrutinized by a lot of the other media, in large part because the administration didn't take kindly to questions about his age. They sort of, disparaged you. You remember the whole cheap fakes, deep fakes thing where they literally tried to say that pool video, a product of the White House press corps, was somehow manipulated or developed by artificial intelligence. That was the suggestion. And it wasn't, because what was before our eyes was concerning. And they were able to, sort of brush it off and malign the media that was talking about it by, painting us as bad actors. And I think that dissuaded some of the other press from, really seriously considering those questions. That being said, I'm not surprised by the Politburo, as they described it in the book, these figures of the Biden inner circle that helped shape a lot of the policy and really were, keeping the president corralled behind closed doors with a very tight circle that sometimes didn't allow cabinet members to penetrate. We knew that was their formula from the very beginning. A lot of these decisions that came out of that White House were, it wasn't Biden at the end of the day that was the only voice on these big decisions, save for probably the Afghanistan withdrawal, where that was something that he had his, personal finger on, really dismissing any sort of concerns from the generals and such. But everything else was really sort of a coalition decision, because at the end of the day, Biden was not the candidate that necessarily the Democratic Party wanted in 2020, but they thought that he was the best chance of beating Trump. And so there were all these factions of the party that believed that they owned a slice of the administration. And the decisions that came out of the administration, they wanted to have a part in shaping. So I think that it didn't get criticized that, in contrast to someone like President Trump, where he is leading the party was leading Biden. That was the design, that was the formula, and he was aging in the background. And very few people, aside from Fox, really reported on that as it was going on.
When you think back to your experience in terms of, paying attention to the different things that were going on around you, what was some of the first indications you had about how thick of a bubble there was around the president, particularly in those last 2 years, year and a half of his presidency, that was keeping him kind of shorn off from everything else that was going on around him?
I would say it wasn't even just the last 2 years. I think it was all 4 years. I mean, I covered him on the campaign trail. I remember being in, I think it was like an Elks Lodge or a VFW, when he was holding a town hall and challenged a guy to push-ups. That was something that the party didn't want to see him do. And there was not a lot of trust from the Obama faction of the party over his handling of the administration. So when he won, and they brought in all of these sort of Democratic policy heavyweights, holdovers from the Obama years, they locked him down from the beginning. There was very little media access. When there was access, it was also the pandemic. So they got to sort of whittle down the footprint of those who got access to him, or the questions that he would take under the guise of, COVID safety guidelines. We held, for the first year of the briefing, I think that we only had 6 or so seats in the briefing room. It was a rotational basis where people could even get in and ask Jen Psaki a question. When some of the restrictions lifted, we would do events in South Court Auditorium. He would come in and, we would be held back. There'd be a couple of us. But this was really the formula all along. And we noticed it was getting more insular really when you would have less access to top administration officials in terms of being able to get a call back or get something different, get like a behind the scenes understanding of what the discussion was. You used to be able to get on background some, information or some, sort of insight into what the policy discussion was. They got less and less willing to share those details as, he got further into his term. And it was also at the same time that his, poll numbers were tanking. So I wouldn't say that it was obvious to everybody that the reason, was immediately tied to his age. There were a lot of other factors at the time that sort of clamped down the circle around him. But it became very, very visible as he embarked on this, re-election bid and was going to have to travel around the country. And it seemed impossible that he would even be able to achieve that.
So I know that there's questions that a lot of the American people have about what we know about the president's health. In the last couple of days, I've had 3 different neighbors approach me at like a hardware store, the bartender, and a neighbor all ask me, so how long do you think he actually had cancer? And the question that I think has to emerge from that is, going forward, how can Americans have confidence in these annual, health reports about the president? Is there going to be some kind of policy change in this area, or is this going to be a situation where, it's just everybody's giving these glowing Ronnie Jackson reports, till kingdom come, and Americans are just going to have to live with that and not really be able to find the truth about the situation with the commander-in-chief's health?
I hate to say that I think that it's likely that things stay the way that they are. I mean, at the end of the day, the medical reports that we get from the White House doctor are, written in support of the president. We saw it with Trump's physical. Of course, he had a great physical, but there were lines there about, he's lost some weight because he's out there winning golf tournaments all the time. And I think that people just sort of grow to expect that. I also think, though, that when you have someone who was, now he's 82, had he won re-election, he would have been 86 at the end of his term. And, we just found out yesterday from a Biden spokesperson that the last known blood test, PSA test for sort of the markers of prostate cancer was over 10 years ago. It was in 2014. But in 2019, he was being treated for an enlarged prostate. We believe that he was on medication for that. So it's almost inconceivable that he wouldn't have been intermittently, at least, being tested for complications from that. You would assume that might be part of, his routine screening. But what we're hearing from, the White House is that he hadn't been diagnosed with cancer, or excuse me, the former White House. He hadn't been diagnosed with cancer of the prostate ever before. The last test for PSA was in 2014. And that would have meant that he went for years on this medication without that kind of screening. I think in the future, people are going to want to see more detail in these tests. They're going to want to know, how do you read the chart like a doctor would? Because while we are used to getting a summary, I think that people are, after, the 2024 election, less and less likely to trust those reports coming out of the White House. And I think that speaks also for the Democratic Party. I mean, they swapped their candidate at the end. It was a surprise to many in the party that this was, going to happen with only 100 days till Election Day. And I think that there are many in the party who are feeling angry about what happened, wishing that they had more time. So I think this might be a bipartisan push to be more transparent with the American people to make sure that their leadership is fit to serve.
Last question for you, Jacqui. When you're covering the White House on a rainy day like this and you have to go in and out of that briefing room, how much of a pain in the butt is it to have people carrying umbrellas and all the other crap that they have to bring to navigate around those already cramped quarters?
It's, it comes with the territory. We have umbrellas today. We have flags on the North Lawn behind me because we're going to see the arrival of the South African president here. There's a lot of activity around this White House. I'll say there's more activity now that Trump is president in terms of both access to him, interest from the press. You have a huge footprint of outlets that have sort of bolstered their coverage of the White House, including from outlets that weren't always here for Biden. So it's a busy place. You kind of just get used to it. I wouldn't say, though, that it's a glamorous job. We work in a basement like the size of a closet. It just is a very conveniently located basement between the president's residence and his workplace. So we'll take it.
Jacqui, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and have a good day. And we're back on the Big Ben Show, joined by Dylan, our board operator, and Christine from New York. And I have something that I want to talk to you about, which is a new feature on this show when smart people say stupid things. Now, I'm sure you both have had this happen in your life. You've had to have known somebody smart, Christine, who just said something very stupid to you out of nowhere.
Ben, are you talking about me already? It's not nice. Did Guy Benson tell you to say that?
No. Guy and I don't need to coordinate. We already, yeah, clearly. Well, I just want to use an example of when a smart person says stupid things. And I think that this is going to be a running element of this show because it just happens so often. You know, you run across these folks who have, you know, accomplished academic careers and you know, senior think tank fellowships and stuff like that. And then out of nowhere, they come up with these ridiculous ideas. I still remember reading a thing by Nick Christakis, you know, this, you know, high level professor during the early days of COVID, recommending that America mandate that we use matchsticks or Q-tips in every elevator to press the elevator buttons.
I didn't even know that
by force of law. Yes, exactly. So that's just the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Well, in this case, I want to bring up Charles Lehman. He's at the Manhattan Institute. He has his own podcast, but he's a guy in favor of using the power of the state to ban a bunch of things. He's opposed to the issuance of kind of unrestricting a pot. He's opposed to sports gambling. He's opposed to tobacco. And he clearly has strong misgivings about alcohol. Basically, he's a prohibitionist. Well, he has a new thing that he's come out in favor of this past week, which he was getting a little bit of flack for, actually a lot of flack for online. And that was he's going after Big Macs and burritos.
Come on.
I just want to read to you an excerpt of this. It's an article about temptation goods, he calls it. Not every temptation good can be banned. And he acknowledges there's zero appetite for a crackdown on burritos, but regulation can increase the frictions associated with these products. I mean, this is the worst political idea I've ever heard of in my life. I want to ban everything that you enjoy. I want to ban everything fun, or I want to make it harder for you to order Chipotle. Like, that's just it's absolutely ridiculous, guys.
I have a question. What do you think this guy does on a Saturday night to let loose?
You know, I have no idea, but it definitely does not sound like the kind of Saturday night that I enjoy. And it reminds me more than anything else of a certain character from an old Simpsons episode, the Hunter of the Beer Baron, cut 11.
And he who shall violate this law shall be punished by catapult. Last time I helped you.
Sorry, I thought you'd get a fine, or at most 3-4 years in jail.
It's not up to us to choose which laws we want to obey. If it were, I'd kill everyone who looked at me cockeyed. Our laws are in place for a reason.
Send him back to mama, boy.
That's what I think about those ideas, if not Mr. Lehman himself. Yeet them into the sea with a catapult. So, Dylan, I'm sad to say that already you are causing controversy on this show. And there's someone out there, a friend of the pod and someone who I talk to every Friday, the great Hugh Hewitt, who has a serious problem with you. Listen to this, cut 12.
Now, really, a Pacers shout out. Really, Ben, a Pacers shout out. I will lay me down and bleed a while and then rise to fight again.
Okay. In my defense, the wonderful man who is also Guy Benson's board man, who my team is Guy's team. He is a Pacers fan. He wears Pacers gear. He is like a dedicated.
Fire him! Fire him! They played like they had baseball bats. I think they had shanks. They actually took Darius out of the first game like with a body slam. They're just rotten people from Indiana.
Razor blades in their armpits.
That's I'm telling you. It was world wrestling, and I got to say, I heard that we're doing Pacers talk on Big Ben, and you saved it for the end, so you tricked me. It was all the way at the end. Tricked me.
I built you up, and only to do something like that.
So, Dylan, is this the first time that someone has called for your firing before Christine?
First time ever, actually. 100%. 100%. And even funnier that it's from Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, thank you for watching the show. Glad you're a listener. But yeah, first time I've ever been called to be fired, and especially by a nationally syndicated conservative politician like figurehead. That's the first time ever for me.
Well, I think that if you're going to get calls for your firing, sports fandom is at least a deserved one.
That's fair.
For this.
Welcome to the club, Dylan.
Yeah, exactly.
And let me tell you something, like at least it's for sports. I mean, Guy has been talking about trying to send me to remedial producing school this summer instead of working.
No, I think that's something we may have to talk about in the future, Christine.
Book it.
So I know that I swore that, as a warning to you, Christine, that we were going to have a nerd moment in these grab bags every week.
Yes.
And this week we actually have a good and deserved one. And maybe we'll have my friend Stephen Kent of Geeky Stoics on in the future to talk about the phenomenal success of the show Andor, which ended last week, which has been a huge critical success. The creator of it and writer, director Tony Gilroy was talking at the 92nd Street Y about one of the reasons that he made the show the way that it was. And I just found this of interest, Dylan. This is cut 13.
Like, what is Star Wars? And for growing up, you're like, well, Star Wars is the Skywalkers. Star Wars is the Force. And that's not this show, and yet it is Star Wars. I don't know, for you, having come out the other side of this long journey, can you define what is Star Wars? What makes something fit under that umbrella?
I don't want to repeat myself, but if you think about it, the easiest way to think about it is like the Vatican. Right. Like Lucasfilm is the Vatican, and there's like a Curia, and there's people that and there are I don't know all the levels. There's 8-10 levels of canonical material, all the way down to like obscure fan fiction or whatever. And there's a guy. There's Pablo Hidalgo, who's the guy who's been there, the librarian of this thing for a very long time. And I knew him from Rogue. My experience on Rogue is very different than this. But when I called Pablo and I go, okay, like fess up, the galaxy, all these beings. How many of these beings in the 5 years that I get? How many of them have ever heard of the Force? Well, like nobody. How many have ever seen a lightsaber? Nobody. How many have heard of these 4 people you keep making the movies about? Nobody. So I was like, okay, well, that's a pretty wide field, and that's the Star Wars reality.
Right.
So look,
that's enough, right?
Gilroy is a phenomenal director. He made one of my favorite movies, Michael Clayton, and so bringing a different perspective on this, I think, to Star Wars is one of the reasons why this show was such a critical success. But Dylan, are you surprised that it's only now that we're finally getting content that isn't just Skywalker family drama from just given how long this IP has existed?
I mean, it's been around since the first Star Wars came out in the 70s.
Yep.
So like we've had this story following this family. And of course there's the prequels, the regular movies, the sequels, shows like the Clone Wars that are just like still just like seasons and seasons and seasons of material. And like I remember they mentioned it in that quote, Rogue One, which is what like one of the first independent stories from like the whole Skywalker thing. And I love that movie. It was so good. And I've yet to see Andor. I need to dive into it. I need to binge it. I've been looking for a new show. Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in that one.
Well,
next,
I'll let you in on a secret, which is our most Star Wars beloved Fox executive, Ron. He has not been able to see it either because he tells me that his wife doesn't allow him. His wife has been holding him back from seeing it. So there's no excuse. Everybody should go out and see Andor, binge it entirely. It's phenomenal, and the second season ends with a bang. So, Christine, before we go,
you don't want my take on any of that?
Do you have a take on that? Is it just yelling nerd
I
really
literally
loudly?
was about to fall asleep. I've never seen Star Wars.
Never. Not even one. Not even once.
I don't even know what the premise. I don't know anything about it. And is Star Trek related, or is that just something totally different? I'm not kidding. Is that like a cousin show, or just totally not related? We don't have enough time, right?
Yeah. To quote the late great Arrested Development, here's $20. Go see a Star Wars. So I want to ask you though about another I'm sure, incredible production, which you were able to see last night. Tell me about your evening at the theater.
Oh, gosh. My daughter is in drama. She's in 6th grade, so she's in the drama club. And last night they had the production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a bad show, Charlie Brown. I don't understand what is happening. I'm not going to be one of those parents that said, oh, it was amazing. Could you believe those kids? No, they all stunk. And I wish I had time, Ben, that I could go be the drama teacher, because I couldn't understand what they were singing. I didn't know what they were saying, and I could barely see.
How old are these children?
They go from 4th grade to 8th grade.
Oh, my God. Mm-hmm. So it should actually be intelligible.
Yes. Oh, yes. They've been practicing for 5 months.
5 months?
Yes. I had my head in my hands half the time looking at my husband going, we pay for her to go to this school. We actually pay a lot of money for her to go to this school.
Well, you can make up for it by searching YouTube and finding the depiction of Bill Hader in "You're a Rat Bastard, Charlie Brown," which is a good way to watch that.
The good news is I get to go see it again tonight.
Oh, you get to see it again?
Yes.
What? You have to go back? You crawl back into the well?
I have to. I'm her mom. I mean, you know, these are the things you're going to have to do too, Ben. Hopefully your daughter's productions will be a little more higher class.
Oh, man, like walking back into Shay. I want to thank you both again. The show's been going great, and appreciate all your work as always. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. Shoot us an email at bigben@fox.com. Share the show with your friends. We'll be back next week with more to dive back into the fray.